All right, welcome everybody. We always start with introductions, so we'll go around the table, then hit the back row. I'm Rayle, Chair of CARD and Chair of Scio for Safe Water. And enough said, everybody else knows.
Beth Collins, resident of Ann Arbor.
Hanna Nature Area, Ann Arbor resident, and currently Secretary for CARD, although I hope to be passing the torch tonight.
Dan Hamill, EGLE Project Manager for the Gelman site.
Jeff Ener, Ann Arbor resident and City Council also.
Rita Caruso, Ann Arbor resident, and Professor of Toxicology, University of Michigan.
Vince Caruso, coordinator member for the Allen Creek Watershed Group and board member for CARD.
Marcia Haddix, Ann Arbor resident.
Diana Wright, lifelong resident of Ann Arbor. And just so nobody says something to me again, I used to work for Gelman.
I'm Jack Eaton. I'm an Ann Arbor City Council member.
Jim Schultz, Ann Arbor resident, CARD member.
Bob Bailey, Scio resident, and I used to work for the company that sold them the dioxin.
Mike Moran, Ann Arbor Township Supervisor and Vice Chair of CARD.
Kathy Knowles, Scio trustee.
Oh, Jillian Carey, Scio Township resident.
Colleen Lynn, PhD student from Wayne State University. Katie Jositis, Congresswoman Zingel's office.
Dylan Thomas, Ortiz, yeah. Spencer Weaver, 42.
Okay. Next on the agenda is minutes.
All right, have the board members been able to review the minutes? Okay, I
Yeah.
move that we approve the minutes from the September meeting.
I'll second.
Yeah, all right, if, in favor of approving?
Aye.
Yeah, any opposed?
Thanks for
All right, yeah, thanks. Yes.
And then this is a special one because it's time to elect officers again. So you want to
All right,
run this?
Yeah, sure. So to be eligible to vote, you would either be a Washtenaw County resident, property owner, or business operator who has attended 3 of the last 5 meetings, either the 5 prior to today or the 5 including today. So we'll just do this as a voice vote. The slate up on the screen is Chair Roger, Vice Chair Mike Moran, Treasurer Vince Caruso, Secretary Beth Collins, and Executive Director Jennifer Kahn. So all who are eligible to vote, if you're in favor of this slate, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I'm not sure if I was eligible to vote.
You are eligible to vote.
Aye.
Yes, okay, thank you.
If you're on this
That was
list.
close. Push us over the top.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sean.
sure.
Yeah,
It's
great
my
job,
pleasure,
yeah.
Bob. Thank you. To the people who are willing to continue.
Thank you, Beth. You're the best.
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons it's important to sign in, because the sign-in sheets get tallied here under each meeting column, and then we have a formula that says whether you've been here 3 of the last 5 times. So this will get updated after the meeting. This is one of the jobs of the secretary. What's next? EGLE Updates. So Dan.
Yes, the first bullet was Roger had put on the agenda there was database changes. He and I are working together to try to get some additional data into columns of our database, specifically surface water locations, XY locations, and elevations. Now, I will tell you, I have, it was a good idea, but he and I also need to sit down and talk a little bit about his other suggestion about when we take surface water samples, how to get an elevation and relate it to, so the database, you can, when you go into the database and you do evaluations, it relates that surface water is higher, the water's higher or lower, that type of thing. I haven't been able to do that one yet. Now, the kicker about that is when I go take a surface water sample, I don't take an elevation. right now, I just grabbed some elevations off of Google Earth, just to have kind of an elevation. Those elevations, surface water elevations, have not been shot. So we have to sit down and think about how we're going to have to do that. Either get it surveyed at one time from strategic locations, like a bridge or something like that, that I take the samples from, or whatever, if we can go down that path of having surface water elevations put into the database when the sample was taken. So, like I said, he and I are working on that. Roger, anything else?
Basically, we'd like as accurate as possible elevations. And we think we have that for the wells within a fraction of a foot, which is important when you're doing groundwater modeling. A few inches makes a big difference
So they have
in
it
which
for
way
the,
the water's flowing.
they have it for the pipes too. So if we take samples from pipes, we know.
Well, I will
exactly-
tell you, you're talking about Allen Creek, the Allen Creek drain pipes. We don't really have it. We've asked the city for those elevations,
Okay.
XYs and the elevation. They gave us the XYs early on. They have, because of their policy now, because of
Homeland
safety,
security, yeah.
they are requesting that if they're giving that out, that we sign a non-disclosure agreement. So that's problematic when you're the state agency and you have data that's FOIA-able, that type of thing. So we have not officially got that, the official record. We've done some estimates just by information that's available into the public domain. And so I don't know whether we'll get an actual down to the 10th of a foot type of estimate. So we'll see where that takes us, and as far as evaluation on Allen Creek, and we'll go from there. Yes?
Only a reminder, we've talked several times about using GPS of some sort. It has the added benefit that if you get the elevation from a GPS, you're also going to get the XY or lat longe on the same point. So,
Are they waterproof?
so GPS is more than capable of providing X, Y, and Z. If
Just drop it down the hole.
no, you should measure it at the surface and drop a plumb line. I mean, that's easy.
That's problematic.
If you got 10 feet of string and you,
Well, I think what Dan's
So-
talking about is in the Allen Creek drain pipe.
The
which
pipe,
we have.
we wanted to get the invert.
well, that was my point. If
Well,
know
you
that-
still have to get an invert, you still have to get a measurement from where the top of the manhole down. And we should have done it when we were taking the measurements. We probably wouldn't have run into this because after we asked, it was, we have a policy that we're not allowed to really give that out.
Right.
So we're running into that, hindsight, I could have had a V8 moment, whatever you want to call it. Like I said, it's problematic for the state just because what we are required to do to sign a non-disclosure agreement on data and information. So we're working out, that's,
How about if I gave you the elevation?
I won't say no. I won't say no. Like I said, what we did was take public information and come up with a good estimate, I think, of what those inverts are, and kind of related.
Pole is about a 10-foot pole.
Well, that's what I was going to do, and I just never got a survey pole out there when we were doing the samples.
Well,
And,
this relates to another item later in the agenda, in that, why even bother sampling in the drains? Because it doesn't tell you what's in the groundwater. It tells you what's in the drain.
That's later in the agenda.
And the drain may be, drawing from lots of different places.
It's a line.
So if we really want to know where the groundwater is, we put a regular monitoring well in that we do know the elevation of, we do know the XY of, and we know exactly where the dioxine's coming from, instead of dinking around with sampling the drains.
Just realize that the sampling of the drains was requested by Washtenaw County. and Cora.
Right,
So
but-
we did
but it's
that,
not
but you
the-
are right, it's a line of evidence, it may give you an indication.
It's not a substitute for having real data from the groundwater.
Yeah.
No, but it is, it tells you where you need to put your wells. Because if
It's
the
not
first,
necessarily.
Well,
Well, if something shows up.
It's
you gotta
later in
catch that.
the, it's later in the agenda.
yeah. But we don't, as long as it's not delaying getting those permanent monitoring wells. Anyway, so what else you have?
Do you have anything related to what we're talking about anymore? I have a couple
Well,
of those that, you know.
I think what I'm really like to see is I'd really like to see a double check of all the XYs and elevations. And to me, that's kind of a no-brainer. We know that there are elevations that are wrong. We know that there are XYs that are wrong. So that means some of the data that we're using for analysis is incomplete or wrong. And it seems like this would be something that could be required. Isn't the company required to do, I mean, I know they used to do this at least once a year, do a static water level reading on every well within the same day, so you can have a really snapshot picture of what the static water level reads.
Required?
Well, I don't know if it's
No,
required,
it
but
has
they
been asked
did
of
that.
them in the past, and they have done that.
Right. So while they're doing that, why not just take the reading at that point?
Again, we've asked, your question was passed on in our discussions about it would be nice to make sure those XYs are correct and elevations are correct.
And what's their response?
Well, their response, currently they're not choosing to run out there and do it with the idea of implementing some new gathering of information related to what the negotiations are. So they are not, they have chosen not to fill those questions in right now.
So they're good with having incomplete information given to the court, to the regulators?
Well, they are defending that it's not incorrect. It's maybe off a little bit, but is not making a difference in the interpretation under the current CJ.
And what are they using to justify that? What kind of analysis have they done to justify that?
What do you mean analysis, Roger?
Well,
They're looking at, under the current
just-
objectives of the CJ, they are in compliance.
they're just
So-
pulling that out of thin air and say, well, our data shows that nothing is wrong, but we know some of the data is wrong. Seems like we should hold them to having good data and complete data. I mean, there's so many times they have issued reports and things where they show data that we don't have in the database. They show elevation data on some of their cross-section diagrams that's not in the database. So that's wrong. The missing data is the same as wrong data.
Roger, to do what you've asked and force them again would require going to court right now, and that's not on the short-term agenda.
Yeah,
It's
could
certainly
we have a
some-
recalcitrant?
It's certainly something that we could push for on consent.
I mean, it's right at the top is they have good data.
Yeah.
Do they
Complete,
have a
accurate, up-to-date
stipulation that they
data.
don't have to provide good data?
I doubt it.
I think the judge and the court assumes the data is legitimate, and what they present is not false data.
Well, I think the argument is, and I've heard this from DQ people too, that it's good enough for government work. Well, when you're talking about clean groundwater and the scale of this site, I think we have to kick up the idea of what's good enough for government work. I think we have to have the best, most due diligence on this, and that we're, instead of having sloppy data, sloppy analysis, using the wrong data for a well and claiming it's this well and it's really a different well. There's enough evidence for how they've screwed up that I can't imagine a judge not agreeing with us that we need better data, most complete data. But, you know, I understand the limitations that the DQ has in going after a big company like this, but somebody's got to step in and do that. So you don't have any other?
No, I have a
updates?
couple other bullets.
Okay, go ahead.
The next bullet, we have been real recently, we have some well abandonment activities that have gone on and have been requested to go on here in the near future. The monitoring well 63 cluster, S, I, and D, the property owner, Mark Smith. Those are located in the area to the west of.
They're right here.
Okay. They are within his area that he is
Redeveloped.
developing. Yeah,
The
that's the word I
senior,
want.
there's a senior.
Well, I believe. Well, I don't know for sure what, but basically where those wells are is within a footprint of a structure that he is wanting or going to be putting on that property. He approached Gelman and, excuse me, I'm sorry. He approached Gelman and requested that they abandon those, move those, and so Gelman approached us. And so what we did was basically sampled, you know, they have been sampling under the approved sampling plan. They, you know, are in compliance there. But we gave authority for them to do to do an abandonment currently with some caveats that they do a final sampling of the wells prior to abandonment. They do a final static water level prior to abandonment. Get the required permits from Washtenaw County and Scio Township that are required to do that type of activity, and prepare abandonment logs and submit those to Washtenaw County and EGLE. Excuse me. And so they have complied with that, and on top of that, when they went out and sampled the wells, I went and split sampled with them. And basically, the wells there have been non-detect, all three of them, except back some years ago, there was an anomaly. There was a three or four PPB that came up, but then it hasn't been revisited. My first thought was that it probably is a mistake, but I have the printouts, double-checked our printouts, and there has been you know, since, let's see, they've been sampling,
Since 2001,
yeah.
when it was 14 parts per billion. I don't know where you're getting the 3 from.
Okay, which well, Roger?
This one is.
Yeah, okay, there was, yeah, 14 and 3.
63I, 115 to 125 feet deep. At 14, it's been non-detect ever since.
Right.
D
So-
is non-detect, but S, the shallow one, and it's pretty shallow. What do you have?
50-foot bottom of screen.
Right, 40 to 50 foot deep.
Yep. And in 2018, they had a 4, but between 2001 and that, there was non-detects.
So Dan, is he asking you to close these to help with his development of the property?
Right, it's within the footprint. So what we did was take a look at that. Now, I didn't finish my statement. Those wells are compliance monitoring wells in the current CJ. So basically, we have identified one of the last caveats that, you know, that for this approval is that they're going to have to replace them. And we will start, we're working with them for replacement. Now, two things have come together here is the negotiations to implement the 7.2 criteria, you know, the CJ modifications. We are working with them, but have allowed them to, you know, they're going to replace the wells. since they're compliance monitoring wells. But I sure as heck don't want to just put them in next door, along right away. If I can get a better location as compliance monitoring wells for the 7.2 criteria rather than the 85. What I'm getting at is they've been non-detect. We're going to take a serious look at moving them somewhere closer to a contaminated groundwater as it relates to to being a compliance monitoring wells for the 7.2 criteria.
So are you
Because
saying,
I think you do a disservice to people that want to build houses there, and saying, oh, the wells, they don't apply, and then, so I think it's important that we do have wells in those areas.
yeah, those homes there will not have wells.
No, they
No,
will.
I mean, monitoring wells.
Right,
Yeah.
right. By the way, you said it's been non-detect. I showed that it had 4 parts per billion in 2018.
I said that, Roger. I said in 2018, we had a 4 ppb.
Yeah, so.
And then it was,
So does that, you think that's just a one-off mistake?
when you have not that many years of non-detect and then one and then additional since 2018 non-detect, my experience.
2018 was only last year.
I know, but my experience is that you probably either had a misrepresentation, something happened either at the lab or in the field.
Are there instances from the historical data where you've had lots of non-detect, then you have single digits, and then you have some more non-detects, and then you have increase from that point on?
I haven't evaluated all the monitoring wells that way, Roger.
Seems like it would be pretty easy to do, to say whether or not this is one of those that got a hit, and then it went down to non-detect, which of course doesn't mean that it's 0, but it's less than 1 part per billion. And then later on, it shot up. Seems like that would be pretty easy kind of analysis to do if you had the resources.
Well, and this is that 50-foot one, which I think if it's that Meridian Senior Housing, they were going to build an underground parking lot structure. So I'm sure Scio's on.
This is in a different location.
Oh, okay.
I think. I'm a little confused
This is
here.
housing.
I don't think they
This is houses, okay.
In talking, when we got the request from Gelman, I contacted Mark Smith just to confirm everything. Okay, what's going on? And, because why? Why you want to move these? They're compliance monitoring wells. And he said, he identified, or I got the impression that it was residences, not a
That's
business,
my impression,
not like the, next to your there was going to be a building.
That's
I believe.
what they're building now here. It's a different company.
It's a different
Yeah.
company, but I still think it's
I think it's
a different
At the
location.
end of Parkland Plaza.
Well, there are a whole bunch of parts to this
Okay.
proposed development.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a PUD, there are multiple different parts, and I don't know if you know the new information. Apparently, there's a potential buyer for the whole thing.
No, I don't know that.
I wonder if that's the reasoning for.
Well, it was a quick,
this.
I first heard about the possibility of the 63 cluster having, requesting to be moved back in August. And that's when I contacted Mark, and I got the, the information through Gelman, Jim Brody. And then, Mark had said, it may, I would like a quick turnaround. I may need some, because he didn't elaborate on what was happening. So that falls in with you, something like that. So we got the request in September and took a look at it and printed the data out, confirmed again with him, I did. And so we said that was, with those caveats that I've identified and the stipulations, if you want to call it, we gave permission, and they have abandoned them. They have conducted the abandonment activities. That was conducted on, what was it? That was in, okay.
So they've already abandoned it, but they haven't replaced it yet?
No. And we, again, we are, or want to make sure we get them in spots, not just next door, if they're not going to be a good well for implementation of the new criteria.
Dan, what criteria will you use to make a recommendation on placement of the new monitoring
Well,
wells?
as we are negotiating the implementation of the new CJ with the 7.2 criteria. Right now, the criteria.
That's not what I meant. I meant, were you going to do any studies? Is there going to be like a scientific basis for your recommendation?
A professional evaluation of existing monitoring wells where potential other wells related to implementation of the 7.2 or some data gaps, that type of evaluation. Were we going to go out and drill that ourselves? Not at this time, but basically I've saved the AR compliance monitoring wells. I've saved them to be installed at more logical and locations to review, to be a compliance monitoring well under a modified CJ.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is this is evolving fast before the CJ is going to be modified, potentially.
Right.
So it's happening fast.
It's
is what I'm
happened so
saying.
fast, they've already shut down the well.
Right. And just realize,
And this is the first that CARD has heard about it.
If only other things could happen that fast.
This is the first CARD has heard about this well.
Well, Roger,
And it's already shut down.
Yeah.
So whatever we say today doesn't matter. We're not gonna go ahead and go out and reopen the well, but it's too late for us to weigh in on it. They put that well there for a reason. And I think the reason is that there's this
Finger sticking out.
plume that's going this way, and that's only 666 feet away from this other monitoring well that has double and triple digit parts per billion. So if you're gonna put a new well in, you're just gonna put it a little closer to this well? Because it certainly looked like it was in line with this plume here.
we haven't finalized the location yet.
But why would you let them abandon it before deciding, well, maybe that's the best place for it?
You also have to realize that, what is EGLE going to do is deny that you can abandon that and basically deny development of private property and that type of thing. And also have someone deny access, because the access that Gelman has is related to private property owners giving them access. So
Right,
we did
and
not go down that path.
Who signed the agreement to let this well be in the first place?
Well,
Mark already?
No. The well was installed when.
Before Mark owned this property?
What year was that? I don't,
No, I think his whole family's owned this for years.
okay. I had thought that it was closer to.
Well, our neighborhood has a well right in front of a house and a sidewalk.
Yes.
It's at 85
Yep.
off of Glendale Avenue. They could design the neighborhood so that that well is not conflicting with a home, and that would not be the end of the world. But additionally, I kind of wonder, is this really a good spot for a residential community that close to ground zero? mean,
I agree with you.
How many feet is that from the,
Right. Well, and if they're thinking of putting in a 3-story deep parking garage
Then
on
they-
the one,
they're
I
not-
mean,
That's not here.
That's not
That's
gonna
Well,
do it
but
here. I'd be surprised they put a basement
it's at
here.
the, it's even in the, it's in that finger at the end of Parkland. I
I
watched
know.
them clear it. It's right up there.
It's where the forest is above the finger,
Yeah,
right
But-
next to,
yeah, yeah.
So, turns out we
But
have the
still,
elevation
it's-
for this. This is surface elevation.
Can I ask you a question
921.
about the concept seems to be, the assumption is that it's a stoichiometric relationship. They close one well, we get one well. Is there a defined number of wells that PLS is required to have? I mean, why do they have to close a well before you ask them to put in a new well?
They don't have to close the well before
Okay.
asking them, and
So-
that's one of the.
But that was your rationale for why you let them close the well, I thought, was because they
rationale-
might not be in the best position and you
No,
want to
the
save those
rationale-
4 wells to put them in a better spot. At least that's what I thought I heard you say.
No.
Well, it's a one-to-one though, they
Please
have to
explain.
replace, if they close the well, they have to replace it somewhere in there.
We had,
No, that hasn't happened.
That's what I.
it has not happened. It's not in the CJ, it's not in the court.
And now that they're
We
closed.
have always ask them to do something if it was, if we thought it was important. What I
Is this a
said-
compliance well? Is that different?
Yes.
Okay.
If you, under the CJ,
Yeah.
and then through the court, it's a complete, two of those wells are compliance monitoring wells, which are, under the CJ, compliance monitoring wells are wells that are monitored to make sure that they are in compliance with the court, with the consent judgment. And right now, that in compliance mean that the wells are at a if there's detections, they're at a concentration that's less than 85. If they go over 85, then they're out of compliance, and other potential court-ordered actions could occur, like stipulated penalties, those types of things that are identified in the consent judgment. What I said was we got the request related to a Mark Smith private property owner requesting Gelman to eliminate or move those wells because of the building up of that area. It currently is in footprint, in a design that's within the footprint of a structure that is proposed to be installed,
Okay.
built.
Is this going to set a precedent for other wells on his property?
I don't know.
So I'm sure you looked at the nearby wells when you made that decision.
Yeah, well,
Like
yes.
this one, 56 S.
Mhm.
Is this a compliance well?
No, I don't think so. Let me get I always have to go back to the maps.
So good.
Huh? What did you say?
Those are high numbers.
Because if it was a compliance well, it's been trending up the last several years.
Julie knows right where the plans are. Look, we can see the plans.
Yeah, you got the plans for the
Don't confuse us with the fact.
56 is not a compliance well under the term CJ.
Yeah, and yeah, it's the one that's over 85.
I'm missing your point, Roger. Yes, it could be over 85.
So
but-
this one doesn't have any bearing on the consent judgment, whether it's,
Right. Right, the consent judgment, and that
So,
was way before me.
if you're going to replace the compliance well with one that really shows where the high concentrations are, it seems like you could just say 56 S is a compliance well.
Okay. the
Can Mark Smith go to you and say, I want to shut down 56S? It's not a compliance well. What would your response be?
Yes.
What would the DQ's response be?
I can't answer that right now. I'm not gonna.
I would suggest you guys start thinking about it, because that may be his next step.
Absolutely. it could be.
There's a bunch in there
Yeah.
on this
Yeah.
property.
And
But as far as you're
that's
saying, why don't
dioxin.
you use that as a compliance monitoring well? The compliance monitoring wells are related, as it is currently, and maybe with a modified CJ, related to locations where groundwater is monitored to make sure there is it on the west side, it's a non-expansion objective, that it can't expand out past at a concentration of 85 at strategic locations, these compliance monitoring wells. So making that one, if we're implementing a 7.2 criteria, making that well that's already above 7.2 as a compliance monitoring well, we wouldn't do that if the definition of a compliance monitoring well remains the same.
And of course, this is at a different elevation than the one that was shut down.
The cluster that was shut down.
Yeah.
The wells are they're approximately in a row within, from here to the wall away of the wells were like that, so.
In a cluster.
Yeah, the
But this one over here, 600 and some feet away, is at a different elevation. And where did the 4 parts per billion from this well come from?
Well, again, I can't can't answer that, and if it is a real number.
You
Well, we
tested
won't
it.
know anymore because it's been shut down.
Right, you tested it before it shut down, right?
I tested it, one of the requirements was they sampled the wells before they did.
We don't have those results yet.
Right, I don't have the results of my results, and I will get their results in the next monthly thing, Roger.
So we don't have the results for the sampling that was done before it was shut down, while it was being shut down.
Right, we did it a couple days.
So let's say hypothetically that it comes back as, I don't know, 20 parts per billion. But the well shut down so you can't sample it
Absolutely.
anymore. What would you do?
We would take a look at that and see, discuss with Gelman what their interpretation was.
Yeah, and they will
for
tell
that.
you what they're willing to do, instead of you telling them what to do. They're gonna be telling you what they're willing, they're gonna be telling you what they're willing to do. And that's the problem with the consent judgment, is
Yes. Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. There are, limitations
So
that
when we get rid of this
EGLE,
consent
without going
I'm
to
talking to
court,
all the
can
elected
require-
officials here, this
Yeah.
is,
And-
this is a
and-
no-brainer to me.
So I,
Are there drinking water wells near this area?
Across Liberty,
yeah, along Liberty there.
there's,
And
there's
there-
no plans to run city water out to all these folks.
There was at 500 and some, that those wells were at 500 and some parts per billion.
What, which wells?
And then,
This one?
Yeah,
56. 56S.
That's shallow.
Where's Breeze?
524.
Yeah, and it's gone down to less than 85, then it went up from 85.
Ways from here.
Since that, when it wasn't sampled in 2014 apparently.
Yeah, so
It seems to me obviously need to monitor.
But we're talking about 7.2, all of these are about 7.2.
Yeah. It obviously needs to be.
Excuse me, Dan, do you have an estimated timeline for when you'll have a location for the new monitoring wells?
I mean, like I said, it's kind of being meshed in right now with the negotiations, whether you like it or not, because, a timeline, a requirement for saying, okay, you have to reinstall that well. Again, if we absolutely had to force them to reinstall that well, I'm sure they would fight that in court.
So,
And even at 85, they would fight it, or the?
Well, if it was above 85, we would not have, or near 85, we would not have allowed them to abandon it without a replacement in place.
Right then.
Again, the current consent judgment is the numbers are 85. So if you're asking me what ifs, if that was close to 85, we certainly would not have allowed them to abandon it with a replacement in sometime in the future. We would have, because it's so close, we would have required a replacement immediately. But because they had been non-detect, and we are also thinking about implementing the 7.2, we decided to incorporate that into how we're gonna, the monitoring now well network that will be needed to implement the 7.2.
when you guys were making that decision to let them abandon that well, did you realize that that's the only shallow well that far west?
Yes. We looked at all the elevations, all the wells around, and yes.
I mean, you have to go all the way back to here to find anything that's close to being that shallow.
Mhm.
So we'll try to put another shallow one then.
Again, I realize that people have a concern about timing of that, but that,
Do you
we
think
had
that-
already thought about it's a 3-well cluster, shallow, intermediate, and deep.
Yeah.
We had already thought about that, for replacements in implementing the new criteria, compliance monitoring wells, we had already thought about the need to, depending on where the location is, the need to have a shallow well.
I think that's a little disturbing that you're willing to shut down the only shallow well in that area and not have a replacement ready to go before it was shut down. We don't know if that's coming from the plume or if it's somehow permeating down through leakage from these peat mining lakes. We don't know where that dioxin came from and where it's going. There's no other, there could be other shallow areas beyond this getting close to Liberty Road. And there's, you know, scores of homeowner wells down here south of Liberty Road. And just because you're sampling them every year or two doesn't make those homeowners feel any better that I don't think they want to be the first hits of dioxin south of Liberty Road. I think they would like to have a heads up that there's dioxin heading that way, and so we can have time to stop it.
Was there like commercial peat mining lakes? That's what you're saying?
These were,
Were.
yeah, in the history, the Smith family or relatives that owned it, that's what they did. They, you know, they mined the peat and sold it. Because, you know, in the, probably right after the glaciation, all these sister lakes were probably all connected. It was kind of one big marshy area lake. And that's why there's peat there. So, you know, there's that.
Yeah, we sample, I call them, you know, on the database, those are called those two lakes there?
Yeah.
I call them the Smith Ponds, east and west.
That's what those are referred to.
Yeah, in my database, is Smith. You'll also see Smith, kind of another name, Smith Lake or something. But when I started, I split the two, east and west, Smith Pond, east.
That's good.
Can we just make it clear, though, that if that other well, 56, or near the finger of that plume, if he's requesting ever to do that, because it had almost 1,000 parts per billion, you would not allow him to?
Well, we wouldn't have. I'm going to manage expectations here. It's not that I'm not going to say tonight that we won't allow that. It definitely will be reviewed, you know, in May. I had the example that we would require other stipulations like replacement in place prior to abandonment, something like that, depending on what the concentrations were as well.
Did you know this was going to happen in the September CARB meeting?
I had been, yeah, I guess I had been, we're thinking we may have to do this. I had not been officially requested, but we had, after that, that's when the requests came in.
I think the CARB group would appreciate getting heads up on this kind of stuff.
Yes.
We come and we're volunteers, all of us pretty much. I think we have a lot of knowledge and a lot of, I don't know, connections in the community. People come to us and ask questions. I think it'd be good to keep us abreast of these kind of developments so that we can provide some input and maybe some intellectual
Insight.
knowledge that you know we've gained over the years.
And maybe some support.
And maybe some,
Perhaps EGLE would appreciate having some community basis for their decisions.
Again, I guess I had, when the subject was broached, hey, that we're looking,
it was, yeah, but
you
it
know,
was
at
just-
63, but it wasn't
it was the
related.
initial contact.
You know, that was just, okay, we may have a redevelopment, we may need to move these or replace these.
So when did you recall when that was, when you first heard about it?
Let's say middle of August,
Middle of August.
something like that.
So are there any other similar developments that you would like to disclose today?
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
and I only found about this one last week, guys. Okay, is that quick enough?
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad, that's, a week is good.
Rayle, maybe.
You do have
Let's
a
hear it.
I do have another.
All right, let's hear that one. That one sounds more
Maybe we
intriguing.
don't learn about it.
This one's already.
Gelman has requested to basically plug a extraction well, TW12, a former extraction well. They haven't utilized it as an extraction well. Roger, can you go to the front of their property there? Just southwest of Dolph, whatever. It's extraction well TW12. They basically submitted a report last week about plugging that in support of that. They've it hasn't pumped since 2000 and hasn't been a extraction well since 2009, I believe. And
Why aren't they pumping from it?
No, they said they aren't because
Yeah.
they probably not high enough concentration.
Oh.
right, it drops
So
off.
it's
I have.
either-
I'm gonna
It's-
post this, so it'll basically they they gave information. It became flatlined at a couple PTB. Let's see what we're down at. Let me just a second here. And so they and right next door are monitoring wells 65 SI and D. It's a cluster, and that cluster is through the same extraction interval. The extraction interval for that well, was 200, screened interval was 200, let's say 240 to 260 feet.
Yeah.
And
So right now, it's, the last reading was only 3 times what the cleanup standard is.
Right. And again, adjacent monitoring wells, 65 SI and D are right next, are within, right next door. And again, the request was in response to the property owner requesting to expand the parking lot.
Sure.
Mark Smith.
Oh, okay.
And so it's not being used, it's been taken out of service as an extraction well. You have, it has, like if you looked at Roger's thing there, it become pretty flatline.
Yeah.
And we have the backup of an immediately adjacent.
Do you think these locations are right?
They're
no.
in a parking lot now.
No, it's in the road.
Yeah, but I mean, they.
I'm pretty sure they're not in the road.
No, they're not. They're not. They're I believe up toward those 2 trees.
Okay, but that's not what the data says. Just pointing that out.
Okay.
Earlier comments.
That's a road.
So when they say you want to have a parking lot, so they want to have a parking lot in front.
Great. How nice is that?
How far does
Impervious
the
surface.
road right of way extend here?
I do not know, and I don't know what the local requirements, the setback requirements for a parking lot. I'm just, we were again asked about
Right.
Roger, can you?
abandoning that, and we evaluated that, and with the monitoring wells there, we've given permission to go ahead.
T12 is really high.
Well, let's see, according to this, they're like 80 feet apart.
The, where I know them just visual, they're,
Closer to that,
yeah, they're next to those trees there.
next to the trees. So
This to the west.
So this is probably wrong too then. This location.
But what are the readings on T12 again, Roger?
It has become into the 20s since 2009, and
But when we go to 7, that's.
But
right, but you have the other monitoring wells that are covering, if you want to say covering that area.
Well,
They are not utilizing it as an extraction well. Right across the street to the northeast, the Dolph well is still extraction. So historically, overall, the groundwater flow is being influenced in that direction, and with those other monitoring wells as if you want to say covering that area, and them have basically taken the surface, taken everything out of TW12. It's
Yeah, and typically, perch wells are not good monitoring wells because they have really wide screens. This one's got a 20-foot screen. Meaning you don't know if it's coming from up here or 20 feet down or somewhere in between.
The other wells that are in there, the 65,
65D is about the same elevation.
yep, and then the I is 100 and
Right.
something, and then the S is just under 100, just as I remember. And so the three wells cover the area of that screen, you know, and above. So,
Yeah. So
again,
65.
it was, they weren't sampling but once a year under the approved, and it was an extraction well that isn't being utilized as an extraction well. So,
Any other updates?
Well,
No other-
So
no
EGLE
other-
approved this already,
Yes,
and
it does.
about the TW12.
yes, we gave that out in an email yesterday. They have not done, you know, they will tell us a schedule of when they're gonna do that, and I will, again, I'm going to attempt to go ahead and split samples at their application too. Inform them of that, so.
How do these deep wells, the extraction well and MW65D, how do they compare with Gelman's own supply wells in terms of stuff?
I don't recall what the supply was that they abandoned, a year and a half ago. I don't remember what the depths were on that.
Because
I'd have to go back.
somehow they got away with abandoning those without having a final reading.
Right. We didn't, they weren't part of the, if you want to say, the CJ monitoring plans. They weren't part of the extraction system related to the.
Yeah, I know that, but they were also the only deep wells.
I don't
early on
disagree with
on
you,
their
Roger.
property.
They were abandoned and, you know,
These were their supply wells that their people were drinking
years ago.
years ago.
And also fire suppression.
Yeah, that's a different one. But yeah.
So this idea that it's not of good value to them because it's this, it sort of has reached this diminishing returns, this sort of flat line.
They have, yeah, in
I mean,
their
doesn't-
interpretations, and it's a valid interpretation. It basically, extraction and the wells, they do become
Asymptomatic?
Well, not symptomatic.
Asymptomatic?
Yes, that's the word.
I'm terrible on that. And basically, you don't get, for the pumping, it flatlines. And it may still be a positive number, but it does, there's no benefit to, it's not extracting mass as it did when it first started, when it dropped down.
Right.
That's one of the things that we talk to them about on extraction wells, changing locations or, things in the future. We would want to go to where there's high concentrations and there hasn't been pumping. What I call remediation stress. Moving that stress around does assist in removal under normal groundwater pumpetry.
When you were discussing that with them, did you raise the subject of why aren't you extracting from the really high concentrations here? Near MW1 and MW1 replacement. Did you happen to discuss that with them?
No, not that specific location. We haven't discussed that.
Because that's
If you're gonna move a
pretty
well,
high.
maybe that's a good well to move to.
Or have an extraction.
There's no extraction well
Well,
on their own property where the high concentrations are.
What's the rationale for that?
So this extraction well could have been pulling dioxin away from their property out to go east or north or whatever.
You're right, it wasn't,
Yeah. Meanwhile, they're not remediating the high concentration of the core. And I would think next time you raise the subject with him, you point that out, like, hey, you guys aren't even getting rid of the source of this dioxin.
Well, if we're negotiating still, should that be in the negotiations?
I mean, it seems like every time you meet with them, you would be discussing that. Anyway, that's all you have?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's all I have for replacements. I don't have any more replacements for this meeting, requests. The resampling of the residential wells along Liberty and Breezewood Court was completed. I sent out the data. Basically along Liberty, we did not confirm the positive detections of some VOCs, tetrahydrofuran and chloroform. We did not confirm that with our sampling. It was, if you remember, let me get that out. That's one bad thing about manila folders, that you have to get them out as opposed to.
Yeah, retrieval.
If you remember, basically 4340 on West Liberty had tetrahydrofuran and chloroform, and that was sampled by the county under the long-term monitoring program, like we sample every year residential wells. And they were at, the tetrahydrofuran was at 5 ppb, which reporting limit or detection limit was 5 for the method. And the chloroform was at 0.6 ppb, and the detection method, if you want to say, was 0.5 ppb. We went back and did that again at those locations and the adjacent property right next door, and got non-detects. And that our reporting limit was 1 ppb. We went back to the Breezewood location where we had the new positive detection of 1,4-dioxane, Breezewood Court to the northwest there, and I went back and sampled those on that same day, and we did not confirm that detection that was collected by Washtenaw County during their sampling in May. Again, it was non-detect. Our detection level was 1 ppb. The actual, if you remember, the actual concentration in that well back in May was 1 ppb. So it was a positive of 1. We got non-detect at 1. So we will be sampling there again next year, and that was one of the locations or areas that we were going to do in every 2 years. We will do it again next year.
So the limit of detection was 1 part per billion? The limit of detection?
Yes.
That you used was
Yes,
1 part per
1
billion?
part per billion.
That's the latest method. Did you happen to talk to Evan Pratt? Because there's like 2 drains nearby.
No, I haven't talked to him in relationship to drains up there.
This was a very shallow well, like 51.
Right, 50 feet. At the same time when we sampled that, I think I talked about it a little bit at the last CARD meeting. We, at the same time we did on that Breezewood Court that had a positive detection, we also took nitrate sample, which, because it was such a shallow well and it does have a septic system, you do get doing nitrate sometimes can identify when you have impacts from a septic system. And so we got non-detects on the nitrate at that location. You will also notice, just for clarity, would also notice that on the data that you'll see his address in it with a dash called treat. The owner there had kind of come up with a water filter himself, and he asked me, could you take sample of the water I put through this? I said yes. I said that was fine.
An additional sample.
An additional sample. You'll see it in the data. That I sent.
Post-filtration?
Yeah, post-filtration is a home-built water filter with carbon, and
of course that came back non-detected.
That came back non-detect too. So I just wanted to throw that out because if you look at the actual data, so what's this treat mean? That was a request by him, and I had no problem taking the sample.
Good to know.
At the same time, at that sampling, we also did the surface water sampling out there close to those areas. I believe I discussed that last time. We did the unnamed tributary at Park, the Honey Creek at Dexter, Honey Creek at West Huron Drive, and that's the first time we've done that up near where Honey Creek goes into the thing. And then we did it off the, what I call the North Maple Road Bridge, and you guys,
Huron Valley Drive.
right, and in my database, I have both names, so, okay. And that's the first time we've done it there, and they were all non-detect at that same day. It was August 8th. So again, we were doing the surface waters in the area because that well was so shallow. We did, they weren't all non-detect, I'm sorry. The river was non-detect. We had the same concentrations, tributary at Park, 4.1, the Dexter, Honey Creek at Dexter, 1.5, and the Honey Creek at West Huron Drive, up further at 1.2. In the same concentration ranges that we've, within 1 ppb, or even less than 1 ppb of what we have historically gotten at those locations. Other than we have 2 new locations that we will add to our surface water sampling in the future. Again, we were just trying to get the lines of evidence of what was that positive detection. Was that related to something other than the plume right now? So we will keep monitoring that and continue with monitoring out that way. Like I said, it's already been added to next year's. And that, again, was in conjunction with the discussion with Jenny and Kristen, Washtenaw County. Next year, we're going to be doing, or we do usually about 100 wells. Next year, we're going to be right around 200, not 190, 200 locations, because we're doing some of those that are every 2 years. We're doing them again next year.
Okay.
The NPDES permit renewal information, I wasn't able, I tried to get a hold of the permit people, and they've been out a couple of days, so I didn't get I didn't get a real-time update. I was given from Gelman some data in September here. They, as part of that process, the NPDES people, the people that had been at our meetings, and I believe they will be at the quarterly meeting. They said they would for next month. They, as part of that process, if you remember, they said they will be asking for samples from Gelman of their system and pre-treatment and post-treatment. They must have requested red samples that way, and Gelman has collected and analyzed their red pond, which is their pre-treatment pond. They basically bring all their extraction wells into there's a couple of ponds out there that the one's called the red pond is that's not treated. That's coming from the extraction wells from everywhere, from wherever they're extracting. That's coming into the red pond, and then they pump it out of the red pond through their treatment system, and then it's discharged into the tributary of Honey Creek under their NPDES permit. I have the data. They basically have they've done metal analysis, PCB pesticides. Let's see, some of the semi-volatiles, volatiles, metals, and whatever was asked of them. They do not have detections. They have detections of the 1,4. We knew that was the untreated water, but they don't have any detections of volatile organics, except what is identified as tentatively identified TICs, tentatively identified compounds, where they don't quantify, they don't identify what that peak was on the chromatogram, but they have some organics. But they, again, they fulfilled the request from the water resources, and I have that data, and I will be posting this data. They have metals analysis, they have positive detections. It's a natural, you expect metals detections. And, but they don't have any of the contaminants of concern that we've seen, tetrahydrofuran, chloroform, none of that was in the red pond. Again, that is not the begin-all, end-all for evaluating that, and that's from our water resources group, but it's
The metals concentrations?
pardon me?
The metals concentrations?
Yeah, they have. I haven't evaluated to see if they are above a, if you want to say cleanup criteria, drinking water criteria. I know they evaluated related to their treatment system, fouling of their treatment system and those types of things because of, how they have chemical oxidation is their treatment. So, but I haven't looked to see if they have done it, what, if it, is it high, and just relate. They also then have, they've also.
You have an electronic copy of that?
No, not yet. I have a
Paper copy?
I have a paper, I have a PDF of it, I guess if that's what you call, I thought you meant like an Excel or something.
No, but, so you have an electronic PDF?
Yes.
That's going to be posted somewhere on the website?
Yeah, I'm going to post it on there.
All right. This TIC, tentatively identified compound, what's the next step to find out what those compounds are?
You're going to have to ask a chemist. They would have to do some evaluation of the method, evaluation of the peaks, and relate that to more like a hand evaluation. See, the data.
So we don't know what it is. Just
No. Well, we know that it's not one of the. We know it's not one of the compounds that are presented in the method. Right.
So it's some unknown compound.
Right. And the methods, all the methods have, if you want to say, a list of compounds that are EPA, that.
Right. And it wouldn't have been like a PFAS because that's.
No, it would not have been PFAS, as I understand it. It's not that. If you remember, speaking of that, just to remind you that back in November 2018, our surface water people did take a PFAS sample at their out discharge, and it was non-detect.
But you didn't take a sample at their red pond?
No, we did not, as of yet, take a sample at the red pond.
And I remember back in the day, because when EPA was in doing their preliminary analysis, that was a requirement to say, well, how much, did they even use PFAS?
Right.
And the answer came back not to any great degree or something like that?
Right, we asked them to do a record search, and again, verbally, they identified that they didn't, that wasn't part of the process chemicals.
But they said that implied that they did use it. They did have some, but they couldn't give you a quantity. So instead,
I don't recall the exact language, but.
Well, I kind of do. It said not to any great degree, but then my question was, is that to not any great degree based on dioxane? Or, 1 part per billion, or is that not to any degree based on parts per trillion, which is what PFAS has to be measured to? And that's still an outstanding question as far as I'm concerned.
It's an outstanding question all over Washington County.
Right, and that makes a big difference. Because it doesn't take a whole lot of PFAS to contaminate. It's 1,000 times more, on the order of 1,000 times more potent. And just as, probably even more miscible than dioxane.
I have one more bullet point.
Okay, go ahead.
I owe you a Allen Creek Drains sampling report, summary report. I am behind. I had some activities on other sites come up this last month. Basically, I can tell you that we will, I wanted to let you know that we will be meeting with Evan Pratt who initiated, along with CARD, the request to do that sampling. And we've set up, the earliest we can get together is October 18th would be the earliest meeting time. And I'll have the report, have the report done by then for that meeting. Again, that meeting is related to kind of going through the information and then discuss what's next, maybe, discuss the results and just see what the concerns are on his Washtenaw County requirements on Allen Creek drain.
And is that going to be in pretty much the same location as you sampled before?
We haven't had the
You haven't
meeting.
decided yet?
Yeah, we haven't decided yet.
Okay.
I mean, the summer report will be on the 7 locations that we had in our work plan that he had requested. And yeah, I mean, I believe he's alluded, I think he's probably, told more than he from your memo to the CARD, he knows about that, and so I'm sure we will be talking about other locations. And so.
Yeah, we met with them today.
Okay.
Talked.
But to manage expectations, that the earliest we can do it to get everybody is October 18th. And I'm behind on that report, and I, hope to have that out to everybody. Well, I will have it done by the meeting, definitely, but I hope to be able to get it out to the group here before that.
Yeah, well, having 22 Park Pavilion in West Park has us concerned. That's a relatively high number. It's been going up steadily. And a lot of homes with wet basements on the west side. And so, like I said, we'll talk about it later in one of the agenda items about what we discussed with Evan today. And but I think it's something we need to keep an eye on and not ignore that potential exposure issue.
That's all the bullets I have. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
That is kind of newer member of this group. Just to, ask you a couple layman questions. Going back to the extraction well at Doff is being proposed for closure. Could that well still be maintained as a monitoring well? Would it have utility as a monitoring well?
Well, again, it's not the most efficient monitoring wells because it's larger diameter and larger screen. So with the idea of the wells, the 3 adjacent within tens of feet, really, as I remember visually, and although Roger has pointed out that the XYs maybe are off, within tens of feet, the monitoring wells are adjacent. Those are better monitoring points because were constructed as monitoring wells. They're small diameter, 2-inch, and and limited screen intervals. But we have the coverage of that way. So that was one of the reasons why that we gave permission then for them to abandon it, so they could get that parking lot. That it really wouldn't make an efficient or a good monitored well. We had the other 3 right there. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Just more of an observation. Gelman's success with holding ponds is why we're all here. Or lack of success. I did not realize they were pumping their extraction well into open ponds.
And they're not open. They are aligned with a HDP.
Well, yeah, but there's no top on them. They're not in a building.
No, you're right, there's no top.
Okay. So who keeps track of them? Like, we're supposed to get, what, a couple of inches of rain in the next day or two? We had 2 or 3 really good rainstorms this summer that caused flooding. There was flooding on the Huron River down by Island Park, so forth and so on. Is somebody watching these ponds? Because the last time Gelman had a problem with a full pond, they pumped it out on the ground, and that's why we're all here tonight.
Well, these are nowhere near the overflow like Pond 2 and Pond 1 were. I mean, this is a $3 million,
everybody's coming
3 million
with-
gallon pond.
I may
And the
be-
water in it is more than a dozen feet below the elevation.
They've been engineering, they've been designed with what I would call plenty of engineering safety factor, with the freeboard that's available for gathering contaminated groundwater. They had to do that because of the treatment system. They have to have some freeboard. If the treatment system goes down, whatever is a major part, and they can't do it, they have to be able to do that. And your rain events, your precipitation events. And so
Right.
Roger's right. There is
And it was designed to be a lined pond. Now, I have video evidence that there were holes in the lining before the cleanup began. There were trees growing through it, and parts of the pond lining were ripped away. So presumably they repaired all that before they started their core treatment and discharge back in 1997. But of course, we haven't been allowed in to look at the pond since, so. I'm sure you have.
They yearly, for every 2 years, and it's been a couple of times since I've been involved, which I've been involved probably since November for about 6 years now. They do maintenance on the ponds. They drain them. They drain them down and make sure they clean them to, where the intakes and their piping related to their system. So.
And check for leaks, presumably.
So.
Yeah. Do you know if they keep a tally of how much water goes in, how much water goes out?
Well, yeah, it's under the.
How much water, based on the measurements, how much water is in the pond to see that the math works out?
No, I have not seen data like that. But
Seems like that would be pretty
pumping
easy
rate,
to do.
going into the pond and going, for the NPDES discharge.
Right, but you know those numbers, so it'd just be a matter of calculation to see, is there any indication that the pond is leaking? Of course, they're not required to do that.
Guys, we're 35 minutes behind schedule.
Good point.
I'll shut up.
We don't need to talk about that. Let's talk about the permit renewal.
So Roger, if they do tours, would we be interested in taking a tour?
If time allows.
I would.
I kind of doubt the big board.
We have aerial images. We have drones. So
Yeah, I have drone access, and that's not allowed.
at an oblique angle it could be.
Yeah.
So we have some draft card recommendations that I sent out to card core. Has everybody read these recommendations?
You put it up there for us?
There's some heads and shaking, so I know that not everybody has.
Right. So basically, we're saying, because it should be based on drinking water value of 3.5 parts per billion, and 280 parts per billion for groundwater not used for drinking. And that those criteria should be used for the new permit. Because we went from an 85 parts per billion to 7.2. So we should have some kind of determining of the discharge limits, because we've already seen one well that's probably, on Breezewood, that's probably contaminated from the creek, not from, it's closer to the creek than it is to the edge of the plume. And the more dioxin you put in the creek, partially treated, the more chance you're gonna have of other homeowner wells along Honey Creek being hit with dioxin. And even though it's not at the 7.2, it's still affecting property values. It's putting a burden on the homeowner unnecessarily. So, shall we just read through this? Because we're going to vote on it here. This is 4-page document.
Well, Roger, what about just summarizing the recommendations in the document? Because there's two main recommendations, right?
Okay, why don't you get that, you had notes on that, right?
Well, I think the first recommendation was use the 3.5 parts per billion standard for the discharge.
Right.
That's what CARD would recommend be put into the permit renewal, that, assuming we voted on it.
That's not me, guys.
Yes.
I know, it's the other.
Yes, yes.
But we want to get a head start on this before things get locked to the wrong guy.
Yes, and now, what was the second recommendation in the document? Can you scroll down a little bit more below that map? Let's see here. Yeah, okay, so that first paragraph under the map where it says, the WQC drinking water value of 3.5 micrograms per liter, which is the same as parts per billion, yeah, should be used to establish the dioxane limit in the new Gelman permit. So that means where it discharges after treatment, that's what the limit should be. That's what we're saying. And
Discharges, it should stay under that amount.
Because of the concerns of the Honey Creek contaminating these wells, because it's giving and taking all the way to the river.
And going to the Ann Arbor,
Right.
Barton Pond
Mainly,
eventually.
I think it's mainly because it does give and take water. So sometimes it's actually water's leaving the creek and going into the groundwater.
Right.
And there's homes right next to the creek that have shallow wells, and there are some hits. in some of the
Apparently, we
shallow
already have a
wells.
recent hit
Yeah.
that
And so Rogers and Dan were concerned that contamination in the creek at a high level could contaminate the groundwater, which would then contaminate the drinking water wells, which we shouldn't be, encouraging or allowing.
Okay, and then the second recommendation is the last paragraph, that VOCs and SVOCs should be considered as potential discharge parameters and sampled for as part of the permit renewal. So we're asking Gelman to test for these at the discharge location as part of its permit renewal.
With some frequency that would be described.
That's
Well,
correct.
Yes, I guess that's implied, but it should be explicitly stated, yes. Yeah, so we should probably add that to the recommendation.
Well, I think when they're doing sampling, I think that we give it a little discretion on how often they can do
Okay.
that.
Well, if they include it, I think they'll include it in a reasonable manner.
Right.
They're not just going to say, well,
This isn't the-
every 5 years.
We can always, amend this, but this is our, we can tighten it up if we find some things that need to be tightened later when the permit draft comes out. We can respond to that, but this is going in, this is what our requirements are for the new permit.
Well, thanks for writing it up, Roger, and Dan,
Yeah,
too.
well, Dan did most of it.
Is there any update on when they might have a draft and meetings and all that now that we're into October?
Again, we're gonna find out in November.
No, I don't know. Yeah, they have said that they would be here for they've been, I think, all the last two quarterly meetings, and
They've been here.
they're going to be here for that one.
So, with those two summaries, does anybody have any comments, discussion about this? Well, I had a chance to read it.
If we ask them to go to 3.5 for that, what does that say about the bromates in there? Anything?
Wasn't that a big concern with the new methods?
Okay, just realize, and I'm not the chemical engineer with the treatment train. They have to do certain pre-treatment activities that, and it's chemical oxidation and it affects the naturally occurring bromide and it converts it to bromate, which is problematic. And that's why, and so getting down to 3.5, depending, they may have to adjust their process, and then they would have to go all the way back to, okay, if we adjust, meaning more hydrogen peroxide, more ozone, whatever, is that going to affect the bromate to bromide conversion? So it could, I can't answer whether that would be a problem.
Well, I think we're asking to put it in here.
Yeah.
I think it should be in here.
The bromate?
Because-
I think
because-
what's gonna really happen is that
I think
they
it should be.
they can't meet this with ozone oxidation.
Right, they have to go back to the.
So you don't have to worry about bromine. So with these limits,
You're assuming, Roger.
pretty much assuming right, because we know they can treat to non-detect with UV
With the
oxidation.
old technique.
They can't
Yeah.
apparently with ozone
And they
oxidation
were allowed to switch to save money.
to save money.
But you
No other
you don't want to
reason.
put a sentence or two in there about that?
We can put that in later if it comes to
Okay,
that. But I
because
don't-
I think that's a
it's
good point,
wise.
they're allowed to switch. It introduces a new carcinogen
Right.
of concern.
That the city is already having troubles dealing with in
Yeah.
a natural state.
And,
So it's exacerbating
and they,
the city's.
if they were just
treatment.
returned to what they used to do.
Yeah. Well, our goal with this
They're
first.
Can I interject something? And I'm not 100%, but as what I remember reading in the file, when they were using the UV oxidation, they still had to do pre-treatment.
Oh, sure.
With hydrogen peroxide and stuff like that, and that's still,
No bromate though.
It wasn't.
There's no bromine.
I thought that I read that depending on what they had to do, remember, they didn't have to go down to zero. They were allowed a higher. It might
No,
be
no,
higher.
no. Early on, they had to go to non-detect at Evergreen.
Okay.
Yeah, and they did.
I just want
And
to,
what was
like, I
non-detect?
manage
Remember the
expectations.
windows
Let's,
exception?
And
I don't
another
want
thing-
this, we're not,
We're dealing with a different company now.
okay.
Danaher owns a subsidiary, Trojan UV, that makes one of the better UV oxidation systems, the one that's used in Tucson. And it would seem to be in Danaher's best interest to promote one of their own products and use it here at this site.
Be more
And they might
expensive.
even be able to tweak it so that it doesn't cost so much, as Gelman is homegrown.
Yeah, you could be in their commercial, Roger.
If they were interested, I would do that.
So recognizing this is subject to change at a later time when we see more from the company, do you
Right.
need a motion on this?
Yeah, I move that we approve this.
Any other questions,
Any other questions?
comments?
I move that we approve this from CARD.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. Okay, Vince, you've got some near surface groundwater, or what we're going to start calling it now, shallow groundwater?
Well, yeah, well, I'm not sure that that's a
It's all the
legitimate
same.
concern.
It's all the same
It's all the
idea.
same. So Bob and I met with Evan Pratt. I'll let Bob make some comments as to what happened at that meeting, if he's willing to do that.
Sure.
So Bob wrote up basically an action plan.
Yeah, last month, I wrote up the thing which you all saw.
Right.
My proposal is to simply do some more sampling up the Allen Creek drain, which is shown in the light blue line there. And we know that there wasn't any at Wildwood Avenue. However, the latest sample in West Park was 22 parts per billion. So what I've proposed is that Dan be asked to go out and collect samples at manholes in between there, find out where it's appearing. And because it all slopes downhill there, we'll have an approximation of the elevation where there is a bunch of dioxane appearing in the water. And we can then compare that elevation with the basement floors of nearby residences. And if there really isn't any dioxane up close to somebody's basement floor, then it's not a problem. But I think that this is an efficient way to inform the location of permanent monitoring wells, which we're really going to want to have put in people's front yards, so we know what's actually happening in their very immediate neighborhood. Because if you discover that there is dioxane 4 to 5 feet down, like down by Slauson School, then you might want to pay attention. Based on my calculations, if you believe them, in a document I circulated last winter, you don't really have to worry until you get up around 100. But if you get to 100, you want to start possibly doing indoor measurements or something, and looking carefully. But the idea is to do some easy sampling along the drain where there are existing manholes where they can take samples. It doesn't require planning, capital things. But it seems to me it's an efficient way to inform the location of permanent monitoring wells. The temporary monitoring wells didn't find anything in this whole area. They found some down by Slauson School, but they didn't find any up along. There are a lot of samples along 7th Street, but they didn't find it. So my guess is that they simply either weren't at the right place or at the right elevation. However, we know that the groundwater that leaks into Allen Creek, because we know it's groundwater because there's water when the weather's dry. So it must be groundwater, and it's not coming from wells, it's coming from around 15 feet down or so, which is the bottom of this pipe. It's buried below the bottom of the ravine if you walk around that neighborhood.
But you don't know where up gradient it's entering.
Well, we know where it's 0, and we know where it's 22.
Yeah, we know where it's 0 and 22.
And that's why we're going in between those two. Because this is 22 part per billion. This is some of the highest concentrations we know about.
And
it's important, I think, that we get a handle, and Bob, I think, agrees that we get a handle on where could this be coming from, and could this help us have EGLE and Gelman install permanent monitoring wells for our near-surface groundwater.
Well, the other way to do it is just say, here's where it's coming from. This is the only shallow well we have sampling for in that area. Let's move down gradient from that and put in some permanent monitoring wells.
Well, the problem is that shallow well is still 75 feet down.
Here, if you go over here, it's not going to be 75 feet down.
What would you be dipping into there?
Why not?
Stormwater?
Okay, I'm not quite sure on your question.
Where are you talking about water? No, where are you talking about him sampling?
In the drain.
Just like I think you're talking about what we just did, what we just completed. At strategic manholes, taking water samples at strategic manholes in between the two locations.
In the storm drains.
In the actual
So
storm drains.
here's the map that Paul Life Science put out, and it basically shows
the surface falls away, explodes into
it falls
contaminated
away,
aquifer.
and these a layer cake cutaway is what you're seeing.
Right.
And so the yellow sections are where there's water flow, green is where there's less or very little water flow. And here's West Park. And so we have seeps coming out of West Park, and we have a lot of groundwater, theoretically have a lot of groundwater flowing into the drain. It's my understanding, and we talked to Evan Pratt today about the idea that the city actually installed stubs at the drain beyond 7th Street, so that the water going under 7th and near those homes was not undermining the street and undermining homes, because we have a lot of basements that have been replaced on the west side, especially in this area.
So what you really need, though, is you need the elevation of where the samples are. And you already heard that there's a problem getting there.
Well,
If we just go ahead and get the permanent
I can give you
shallow wells, we'll know what the elevation in the X is.
I can give you the exact elevations, Roger, of those, because we have it on record.
yes.
Well, then we should add that to the data.
Yep. I didn't know he didn't have that.
Well,
So then we should go from there then.
Okay.
well, what we need to do is to use this to find out where to put the wells, because they didn't know the right place last time, apparently. So,
Well, let's produce a spreadsheet of the data that they had that didn't find all this.
sure, yeah.
And the data that you have of where they should be, and we'll review that at a future meeting.
Sure, yeah, that's easy enough to do.
So
But we
Evan-
need the data first.
So Evan
to
Pratt
make-
today agreed that we should have these permanent shallow wells.
That's good.
Okay, so that's something that he's agreed on.
Right.
Um,
Well, I'd like to have him come to a meeting. and-
Well, Bob was there. You know,
Yeah, but I'd like,
All right.
Evan Pratt's making decisions on this in place of CARD.
Oh, he's making requests.
He's he's talking to people that aren't in this room.
Right. No, I would
And
agree.
people are relying on Evan Pratt, and Evan Pratt, according to the spreadsheet, has never been to a CARD meeting. At least not in the last, since we've been keeping attendance. Now, he says he's watched the video, but it seems like, he should, yeah, Evan, please come, Evan.
Come next month.
So he's also agreed to go on a tour with me to look at some potential near surface groundwater issues in the Glendale area and maybe some other places in the West Park to get a handle on maybe, is it really ground infiltration? He feels like there may be some downspouts that are inappropriately installed or other things that
So
are
again,
causing.
Evan is dealing with drains.
Right.
Yeah.
His expertise does not go down to all the aquifers. And I think as a collective, it'll be good for him to come to meetings and get involved in the discussions.
Have you invited him?
Weighing in too much on this. Huh?
Have you invited him?
Well, I have, but I think we have to,
He shows up
people
at
that meet
those
with him
meetings.
should encourage
She
him to
sends
come.
a wide ranging invite list.
So this is like, house in the front seven.
Well, that was a separate meeting though.
Yeah.
Putting aside his attendance or non-attendance, I think that his willingness to work with people from CARD, wouldn't you say you got something out of him that you wanted?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So
That's a
that,
good
I think
sign.
that that's a positive development.
Right.
That's better than ignoring.
Yeah, he's not ignoring this, but somebody look at the camera and invite him, and then perhaps the next item on the agenda. I have another meeting to be to, I'm sorry.
Anything else you guys have? Is there a side discussion going on that we need to share?
Well, just that 500 Maple Ridge, which is on the back of 7, runs parallel to 7. The parcel right south of that is owned by the city. And there's some manhole covers on there. There's some storm drains run through there.
Yep. There's
My
another
sister's
one on
house
seven.
my sisters live at 500.
Okay.
And right now, they took that basement and they redid the basement. They filled it with pea gravel and they jacked the house up and put another story underneath it. And they got rid of the basement because the basement was constantly wet.
Well, the city bought the lot next door.
Yeah. And
So
they
what are
have
you talking
some-
about, like right in here somewhere?
Yeah, 500 Maple Ridge. Yeah, exactly. See Maple Ridge, so.
Maple Ridge.
Yeah, it's like a.
It's right there.
It's like right where the E is. There's an empty lot there.
Okay.
And there's some storm drain covers in there. The city owns that lot.
We sampled, if you go north on Maple Ridge to where it connects Arbor View, we sampled, that was one of the manhole locations, right? South, just the little jug like
Yeah,
this.
there's you can see the empty lot there.
Okay, so that
Just-
drain
those two houses.
is the northern drain.
Yeah.
The 22 Park Pavilion is on the southern drain.
Yeah.
So there's 2 drains that go into West Park and they
Yeah.
connect in West Park. So the 22
Yeah.
is on the lower section.
Right here.
And the upper section is non-detect, I believe.
For
Yeah,
dioxin.
that one.
Chapin would be the one that combines both.
Right.
Eventually, down from West Park is the one of the southern.
So they're looking at the southern branch that's coming up, that goes between Huron and Linwood. So that blue line right through there.
Right.
And it's just the reason this is being done is it's relatively straightforward. DEQ'd, wasn't really interested in doing this to begin with. And this was something that they could do that didn't take much energy, didn't take much time.
Well, it sounds like you have some data that Dan needs to fill out the spreadsheet, and then the city's gonna argue whether or not that should be public.
Okay.
Anybody could go through the surveillance stick.
Which you
really aren't supposed to access me. That's illegal.
So Edwin has contacted Dan about doing those additional tests, and he's agreeable to doing those additional tests on, near Linwood.
Well, this leads right into the next item, which is Dan Bicknell's more than a year-old permanent well sampling for shallow groundwater down gradient from MW82S and other areas here. Because no matter what we find in the drains, it's not necessarily dioxane coming from that exact location. It's coming from somewhere nearby or up gradient, where we really need to have these permanent shallow wells to detect the dioxane before it gets to people's basements, and gets to their sump pumps. We know there's over 300 parts per billion here at MW82S. It's the only shallow well of that elevation anywhere near here. So
On 98, down at the corner of Urbana.
It was 1,000 at Best Park. It's not 1,000 now, but it was at one time. not
but
too
the
long ago.
screened elevation is still, let's see, what does this say? Screened elevation 7. See, that's not very shallow.
No, it's not very shallow. It's 75 feet below grade.
Right.
Hold on,
And to be on the same aquifer as this, it's going to have to be real close to the surface.
Yeah.
And that's where the RLs that they did earlier didn't detect enough in this area. So I think we need to go back and find out where the dioxine's going from here. And
So what's the obstacle to getting these permanent wells installed?
Who's
the
gonna?
will and money.
I hear Donner's
Well,
worth a lot.
The city is gonna put some
$multi-billion
in,
dollars.
but they're talking on the northern.
No, the city's not looking for down here.
No,
The city's looking
but-
up here.
Well, maybe they should if it affects the residents.
Yeah, but maybe,
Ann Arbor.
maybe we should have the responsible party be responsible.
Oh, right, right.
Anyway,
just
that's
say
all we don't want to say
We
about that.
we
is
can't
that-
talk about that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I can talk about one thing, and that is I've asked staff to put a resolution on the agenda for the meeting on Monday to once again petition for an EPA Superfund site.
Yes.
Now, I put in my email that I would move to postpone, but I believe that we need to be negotiating from a position of power.
Yes.
Staff have not yet agreed to do that, which is very disappointing.
To put on the agenda.
To put it on the agenda. And what troubles me is I come to this meeting and time after time, we've got little issues, no one's doing it, no one's taking responsibility. And you'll probably hear me say the same thing on Monday.
Right. How much longer can we go on in this basis? We've already had wells hit that weren't supposed to be hit.
Right.
And we're closing up wells and we're,
Yeah.
yeah.
We're doing less monitoring. There's shallow well monitoring at the core that's been cut back.
We have West Park, the one that was over 986, that they're not gonna do anything about.
Yeah, so it's
85 on
pretty,
Glendale and Abbott.
Mhm.
it's pretty clear that the company is
Needs the EPA.
knowing they're in charge, and they're gonna say, this is what we're willing to do. And the local governments are begging them to do more, and the state's begging them to do more, and the company says, well, we don't have to do that. And that's where we're at.
Well, thank you, Kathy, for.
Question. What's the usual procedure when you ask your staff to prepare something?
I've already prepared it. I've simply asked them to put it on the agenda, and I believe that council members have the right to do that, and I will be discussing it in more detail.
You have to engage in some minor insubordination before it gets on.
And I have to have just the right tone. Okay. And you know.
Just like Jack dresses, right?
Any more discussion on that? So I got I gotta do my 15-minute update in 5 minutes. I got a hold of a Western Michigan study of what's happening in the western plume. This is back in 2002. I haven't had time to load it to this Google Earth mashup yet, but it basically says that in this area here, this loses to groundwater. And that's why there's high concentrations here that haven't gone away.
Who did this study?
A graduate student at Western Michigan University,
Okay.
What year, is that the one that's,
2002.
yeah,
Do you know who I'm talking about?
I don't, the who I don't, but I report, that's the one that it supplemented the USGS report, right? We're talking about that.
I only got this by putting out a request for somebody to send me this, because I couldn't find it anywhere online. And Larry Lemke sent me a copy of it. Because he had cited this study in one of his reports. And in fact, I think that's the only place I found it cited. So why am I so concerned about listening to a graduate student's report from 2002 that only had one citation? It's because that student was Jim Brody, who's the guy that who does all the analysis for Gelman from day one. I don't know if he's still working with Danaher.
Yeah, he works now for F&V, Fleiss and.
Yeah, well, he's switched companies over the years.
Well,
you know,
yeah, but he's
bounced from one to
the key
next.
person that.
That he think he's still involved, right?
Well, he's the key person that I
Yeah.
interface with on the technical side. He's the Gelman's
Right.
consultant.
So have you seen
He's
his?
our Lemke, basically, sort of.
He's who's?
He and Larry have had back and forths.
Right,
Right, he is the consultant for Gelman.
right. Have you seen his report?
No, I can't say that I have. If I've seen it, I didn't read it. I
What's
may
it
not
say?
have noticed.
Yeah, tell
What was
us.
it, I mean, what was it?
Well, like
called?
one thing he says is that this portion of this tributary, by the way, he had, you know, this is called an unnamed tributary. He has a name for it. And I think we should start using his names.
What's he called?
This is called the Sister Lakes Drain, even though it's not a true drain. Sister Lakes Drain, because it drains from Sister Lake 1 and 2. And then this southern unnamed tributary, which is a drain, by the way, because it's light blue here. This is under Evans Bailiwick. That's called the U of M drain. So let's start using those terms. Sister Lakes drain for the northern one, U of M drain for the southern one. Anyway, he says this portion from like about here to here lose to groundwater, and that's why these contamination levels have been steady over the years. It's because it's coming from sediment and discharge. I'm not sure how valid that is, because Larry Lemke and his students show that there's still contamination that's going from the core area through this area here. And so it's probably a little bit of both. It's probably a lot of one, less of another. The other thing he showed in his are maps from different times of the cleanup, where he was showing 10 parts per billion boundaries based on his analysis that never made it into any of the Gelman reports. A lot of the Gelman reports still showed 77 and 85 parts per billion boundary when he was showing down to 10. So you'd have a better idea where the dioxin really was. Of course, on our maps, we still have to guess where the boundary is because this is the 1 part per billion boundary that we estimated over time based on historical hits. And this hasn't been updated to show the bubble going out to Breezewood. The county recently updated theirs, so I have to go back and update mine one of these days. So that happened, and I'll send you the report.
Okay.
Because it was kind of interesting.
Because I was going to ask.
You know, 17 years later, we're getting some more information from the horse's mouth that somehow didn't make it into the information infrastructure that we have. Speaking of which, I'm working with the U of M School of Information, and if you remember this little diagram of all the entities, and I'd asked everybody to think about what data they have and how it relates to the cleanup, and even if it's tangential type of data, you know, like where's the, like the road commission would have it in, as we discussed today, where's the right of way in front of the building, you know, how close can you have the parking lot that doesn't infringe on the right of way. So this first group of SI 501 students chose this project that I pitched in August, and I met with them, and I, rather than looking at all these entities in this first crack, I gave them CARD and SRSW to review our data, what's kind of help define the information infrastructure, what CARD has based on SRSW's archives. Then we're going to go to Washtenaw County, City of Ann Arbor, and Scio Township. And so I picked some people in some of those entities for them to interview. They have a budget to interview 6 people, and one of them. And then they're going to go to some of these other entities. And what they're going to want to do is basically try to get an idea of what information, how it's kept, who's in control of it, how often it's updated, how it can be shared. So we have some idea of building out the information infrastructure that we all need to make good decisions. I initially put the DQ down on it, but I didn't want them to get bogged down and get frustrated. So I left you off for this first round. Because part of what they're going to be doing is, in this first round, they're not only defining what they can about these entities, but they're also defining how to go about doing this in the best way to pass it off to the next class. I'm pitching this as an ongoing class that will live as long as the cleanup lives. And that they can, new classes can come in and add to it based on what, now I have to reinvent the wheel, and improve the process. And over time, we will have a better permanent information infrastructure, how it gets stored, how it gets updated, where it's going to reside, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so like Sandy Arlinghouse stores information on Planet Blue, I believe.
Yep.
Which is a long-term storage space.
Right.
So that'd be great if they could put it in a facility that will be around 20 years from now.
Yeah, if the university starts attending these meetings on a regular basis, that could be an option. Sandy's actually the one that got me started with Google Earth. And meeting with the Google Earth engineers in the early days, and helping with Google Earth Day, which she ran for a few years. So we actually made contributions back to Google Earth based on our studies. So that happened, and that's going to be going on, and we'll have updates from it. And some of their interviews, I mentioned that, we got Fourth Wave Media here that are doing some interviews to do short video clips to try to explain to people what this site's all about. And they might be interested in videoing some of the interviews that the SI students are doing. And the same with the the Wayne State stuff, because you're going to be doing interviews too. So there's all these side projects going on, and that are trying to integrate it all so you're not duplicating work and you're fitting into some kind of pattern of, filling, reducing the unknowns for this site and helping create structure for decision makers so they can make better decisions, have the tools to do that. So all that's going on. And I think that's about all I have for updates, other than I've added some different layers to Google Earth mashups, and looking forward to this next update from Dan, so I can put in the classification for surface water and be able to pull out all the sampling locations that have to do with surface water, because that's one of the things he jumped on and did for this. At my request is to, just like we have classification, like this is the C3 and this is the Southwest and this is the E, we'll have surface water as another type of quote aquifer, that we can pull out all the monitoring that's done on surface water. And there's still a little bit of work to do with the drains, but we're making some progress. So that's all I have. Any questions? Anything I left out as far as you guys are concerned? Got any update from Debbie?
No updates from Debbie. I'm just happy to be here. Always happy to be here.
I just saw her on TV this afternoon.
She's been busy this
Yeah.
week. There's a lot going on.
There's
She'll be
something going on in Washington I've heard about.
just a few things. One really big thing. She'll be on TV and on the radio a lot tomorrow, so I don't know.
Good.
You'll see her a lot tomorrow.
Do you handle her Twitter account?
I do not handle her Twitter account. She does that herself.
I
Her
really
Twitter, her
really
Facebook.
missed her husband's tweets.
Yeah, we all do.
I don't know how anybody can fill that void, but it was
It's a huge void.
poignant and entertaining at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we all miss it every day.
All right, anything else? What's this?
Yeah, just a very quick announcement, this will take 30 seconds. I got an email from Brian Stegwitz, the city council people might already know this, oh, okay. All right, well.
But thank you.
Okay.
Shane, all right.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know why he emailed me, but at any rate, the city will be announcing a public information session for the Sentinel well work, and the date and the time and the place are on the agenda item, October 28th from 7 to 9 in the council chambers. And he said that he would be sending a press release on Thursday or Friday of this week, and that he will also come to the November meeting to share the updates on the Sentinel work.
Okay, so that's the wells he's putting in on the northern side here.
Yeah,
From what
it's
time?
Monday. 7 to 9, yeah, in city council chambers. Yeah, it's October 28th, 7 to 9, city council chambers.
Yeah, so those wells are near the prohibition
The
zone.
northern boundary of the.
Yeah, they're up here.
zone, yes.
Where the high concentrations seem to be.
Something the CAR group has asked to have more of.
Yes.
Right.
Wells that would fill in big gaps.
Well, I think that our new council member, Hayner, was instrumental in helping move that along.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so this is the work that
Let's
Patty
see those
McCall is
muscles show.
doing, I believe. Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
From Tetra Tech.
From Tetra Tech.
Their
yes.
consultant.
Yes. Yeah, she couldn't be here tonight, but sounds like all will be revealed on October 28th.
Yeah.
Well, what's going on is we are trying to take some responsibility for this, without feeling like we're paying for any kind of cleanup. We need to know what's going to happen.
Yes, well, thank you to City Council.
Because again, the discussion here is, how long do we have to wait for Gelman to do something? And this is one of those instances where it's not enough money to really worry about spending it, $100,000 or something. But it's important enough to us that we'll just do it ourselves. And
Can you build on her?
I will leave that to others.
Well, we certainly appreciate your doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you, City
And
Council.
One of the things I'm interested in finding out.
But to follow up on that, if it gets to the point where we don't do anything significant down near West Park, then that's another area that the city should consider actually just doing, if it's that kind of money, then just step into the void that contentious people create,
So have you been in touch with the city about how that data is going to be integrated with the database?
Not yet. I mean, I've been told about the, what they're doing, but I have not been any more detailed than what you guys have been told.
Right,
So
because
we
I
are-
think that's important that the city readily share that with the other stakeholders through
Yes.
CARD. And the same is going to be true for the university data that they sample at Saginaw Forest.
Is university split sampling with you guys or not?
Split
Are
sample?
they gonna do split samples for,
From time to time, the university splits samples with Gelman,
Right.
but not with?
but they
DEQ?
don't
Well, I
feed
don't.
that data to the DEQ. Because I have the university data from 2017. The data from 2018, I just sent another reminder email last week, and they said any day now they'll have the 2018 data ready to share. So this is not a high priority yet for the university, but
They split with Gelman because Gelman is.
Right there, when they're
I mean, they're doing their monitoring plan, so and that includes wells on their property, so.
but the university does their own sampling
Absolutely.
besides what they split with Gelman, and it's very interesting to see the variations.
I have a question for city council members. So, talking to Evan Pratt today, he also alluded to Brian being involved in other issues relating to the Gelman plume. Is he the point person now for the city, or is Missy Stoltz not involved?
Brian
I
is.
believe,
Pardon?
I believe it's Brian.
Yeah,
Brian?
he's officially the point person for this.
If it's water science, then it's going to be Brian. He's qualified to talk to you on those
Does he
issues.
have the time to do this, given the
Well,
fact he's running a treatment plant?
The woman from Tetra Tech is
Yeah,
actually
good call.
going to be the city's representative here. We're paying her to work with him on those issues as well.
But again, her contract is limited scope for this northern area right now.
Well, their company has a number of contracts with the city right now, so I would not suggest that it's just those wells.
She's still working on the,
Leslie? Yeah, that plan's that's moving forward. We
Plan's out.
with the
approved-
landfill.
Well, yeah, the landfill's the second one. So Leslie Science and Nature Center off of Traver in my neighborhood,
Right.
the literal stone's throw from my house. So when the city gave them a grant, they went in there and did to build this playground as part of these other grants they collected. They went in there to find out what the soils were like before they found Dr. Leslie's pit.
Dump zone.
And they've been down 65 feet and they've not found the bottom of it yet.
Ooh.
And it's all over. We got a nice report to the PAC that showed everything that's going on. And basically, city council, we're footing the bill for it because when we accepted that property in the 70s, there wasn't a requirement for phase 1 testing.
Mhm.
And so we took the responsibility along with the property.
Mhm. So you are Danaher for that.
Yeah, basically, but what we've done by sending this cleanup out to Tetra Tech, we've removed the liability for the disposal of those
Home chemistry.
waste, and they're farming parts of that out also.
Should never live next to old farmers or old chemistry.
Yeah, and the arsenic
always
was
have
pretty,
their own plan.
arsenic's a mix anyway.
Arsenic.
But, with all the orchards there, so there was the naturally occurring plus the orchard treatments for the 40, 50 years, it was a scientific orchards. And then, he's trying to develop no-knock gasoline. And so there's all kinds of metals and solvents and.
So what's this gonna cost the city?
What's it, $600 something? $700,000?
Hold on, I thought you said
It's not a million, yeah, but it will.
Yeah, it'll be $1 million by the time we're done, I'm sure.
No, it's not 600 million.
To make sure that they can use that $25,000 grant.
For the
we did.
playground, yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be an expensive playground.
Yeah, it's basically the whole hill behind that solar house, the DTE house. And then there's a concrete slab they had the picnic table on, and that was the cap
We'll have to charge more
That was
money
the cap.
to do it.
Yeah, yeah, well, that's the law.
Yeah,
All you have to
yeah,
do is
they-
prevent exposure.
They capped it.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, pave it over,
So-
prevent some.
But the point being that
This is the
Tetra Tech was
problem.
on our payroll for just such a case, they reacted quickly to it. They did 65 core samples, and soil borings everywhere. They came up with a thing, brought it back to PAC, and we said, "You know, we gotta do it, what are we gonna do?
Did they have to be so thorough?
Yeah, I know. And they had to move the camps. This was discovered when these fall camps were still
Right.
going on. So they had to
We're
move all
trying
the
to be as
camps.
thorough as
All
I
down.
can hurt to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You set a good example.
Set a good example. All right. So see
So you
everybody
call
back
me-
here November 5th?
November 5th?
I'll make sure.
You're a lot of it.